So, what did you do with all the dark money that you got?
Well, I'm doing this podcast, from my private island.
Hi, I'm Natalia with Restore Childhood. Thank you for joining us again today. I'm here with Kelley Krohnert of kovaGeorgia for a short podcast conversation about her work and her brand new Substack that she recently launched. I would like to remind you once again, the best way to support us is to go to restorechildhood.com and subscribe to our Substack and our YouTube and our mailing list. Thank you for your support, and thanks, Kelley, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So Kelley, talk about your last 3 years. You've done some really interesting work with kovaGeorgia, which I think you started just because you wanted to track data and correct some of the misinformation you were seeing on the web. Can you please just tell us about your work and when you started and what you were seeing?
Sure. I launched the website, I think in May of 2020, after just kind of looking and tracking on my own, just like in an Excel spreadsheet, some of the local Georgia data from our Department of Health website. And I just basically wanted to get, some graphs that I had made and things a little more public instead of just sharing them, with people as they asked or on Facebook or whatever. So I was like, I'm just going to make a website. And it kind of just grew. I wasn't ever really expecting this to be a big thing. But as, more and more people were interested in the data of what was going on in Georgia, and I started kind of getting into, fact checking some of these articles when they would get the data wrong, either about, Georgia data or about COVID and kids, which became kind of a second focus of mine. And, just kind of grew from there. And I've just been basically trying to keep an eye on the data and make sure that it's being presented accurately and, make sure that, people understand what we do and what we don't know and, what the numbers really are.
And how dangerous was COVID for children? Could you, provide some context to all the numbers that have been thrown out? We've heard 100,000 kids on ventilators by Justice Sotomayor. We've seen all sorts of misinformation coming out from the science reporter Purva Mandavili at the New York Times. Was COVID ever really a big danger to children, to healthy children?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of dangers that kids face. And, when I first heard about COVID, obviously everyone was very scary sounding. But some of the first data I found and that I looked for basically was, do I need to worry about my daughter? I had a 6th grader at the time. And, that was my number one concern of like, well, is this something that's dangerous to kids? And I mean, we had data, there was data out of China in February 2020. That showed it really was not dangerous to kids. And then there was some additional data that came out from Italy in March. And so I was like, oh, good. And that was kind of like the one saving grace. I was still nervous about COVID at that time. But at least I was like, well, at least I don't have to worry about my kid. I was like, and that's what I told her. I was like, so all this COVID stuff, you're going to be seeing a lot of it on the news, but you don't have to worry. And that's just kind of been my approach. And that's what's just kind of carried me through all this time. Like that to me has always been a huge blessing of like, yes, there is a risk. Like there's a risk to a lot of things. I mean, there's a risk every time we get in the car and go anywhere. There's a risk every time we, go swim in a pool or a lake or, there's a risk that we face all the time, but you can't just focus on the dangers of everything about life. I mean, with kids, you gotta, there's a lot of things we do that, you just are part of, living and being in society. And you try to, take precautions where you can, but you also have to kind of just accept that to do things and participate in life, that there are risks you take every day. So it's just never was something I was, concerned about for kids. And so that, was super reassuring to me.
Can you talk a little bit about the politicization of school reopening? I think that we've had very, very different experiences, you being in Georgia, in a red state, and me being in New York, which is a very, very blue state, and the role of teachers' unions here in New York and the school reopening. It was, pushed off several times. We were lucky that school reopened at the end of September 2020, but there was a time when we weren't sure if they would. Our mayor seemed inclined to do so, but there was a lot of pressure on him not to. So can you talk about, the politicization and what you saw in Georgia as far back as 2020 with regard to school reopening?
Yes, I mean, I never expected that there was going to be so much pushback on reopening schools. I was like, surely everybody's going to reopen in August, and then when it started becoming obvious that was going to happen, it was like, well, some places will open in August and then the other places will see that it worked out and everything is fine. And then it just kind of kept, instead of getting better, like I kept thinking, well, once we have a little more information, it'll get better. And it just kind of kept getting worse. So many schools, were digging in, and, some that had reopened, went back to virtual, or, they were putting in more and more policies with more testing and more closures, when there was X number of cases or positivity was over, or whatever. And it was just kind of mind-boggling to me, because I was like, we're just going about basically like normal. We had masks and we had some other minimal, precautions that we took at our school, but it was, quite normal compared to, what I was seeing on Twitter and in the news about what was going on in New York and, along the West Coast and other places, compared to Georgia and Texas and Florida and, places where schools were open. And I did not predict that early on. I guess I probably should have, looking back, but I thought that was something at least people were going to be able to agree on, is that we need to get our kids back in school as soon as possible, and get their lives back to normal. Because to me, that was always the priority.
When did the mask mandates in schools in Georgia get dropped? Do you remember?
It was all on a district level. None of that was from the state. And we have, there's 160 something counties in Georgia. And some counties even have multiple school districts. So we have a lot of school districts. So a lot of people made different rules. There were some school districts, less than 30 minutes from my house, where kids went back with no masks in August 2020. Some of those were made the news. It was like packed hallways and, Paulding County and Cherokee County, that were, just people were horrified that there was so many kids in close contact or whatever. And other districts, we had one district here in Georgia that didn't reopen at all until April 2021. And then they were masked until we did finally pass a law in Georgia that you cannot force kids to be masked in school. And that wasn't done till the end of April 2022 or so.
Wow. And was there a political divide in the counties that, opened versus the ones that didn't open?
Definitely. It was very political, even within Georgia. Atlanta is much, is quite blue compared to most of the state is, more red. But yeah, geographical and political differences certainly were a big part of that.
Can you talk a little bit about your background in IT and how it prepared you to do this type of work? And did you ever think that you would, kind of go off on your own and start, fact checking, basically the CDC?
Yeah, this is definitely not something I ever really kind of saw myself doing, but I'm just a person who, I just like people to be honest. That's just always been something about me, that I don't deal well with information that's just wrong. And so, my first inclination was like, I have to tell somebody that's wrong. That's not right. They're telling people the wrong information. And I did not ever really expect it would just kind of keep snowballing like it has. And so that was that's been a big surprise to me, but I have worked in IT, pretty much since I got out of college. a long time ago. And, I've been doing, since my daughter was born, I've been just working for, a family-owned business where we do IT consulting and web design and web hosting and things like that. But yeah, I mean, this was definitely not something kind of I expected to go down, but in my previous role before, when I was in the corporate world, I did a lot of different things with data and research. And for a while I was doing some regulatory compliance auditing for the IT department. So, I mean, the whole idea of kind of having, a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and an Access database and tracking numbers and running reports on it all was, all very familiar to me, but it was just kind of being used in a different way. Instead of kind of auditing, my own company's IT systems, I was auditing, data that was being, put out by the media and sometimes by our own CDC, and, our own local Georgia Public Health Department, that I was like, these numbers aren't right. And so, there was people within the local Georgia, there were some people I could contact if I saw a number that went up that wasn't correct or whatever, and I could actually get that fixed a lot of times. But it's been a little bit tougher with the CDC, and it's tougher depending on, the media outlets. Some are very responsive and are happy to make corrections, and some, I send messages to and I tell them, you've got this wrong in this article. This is the real number, and I never hear back from them at all. So it's just, I try what I can, put out there, and let people know when something comes up that I'm like, it's just not right. And I mean, I actually talked about that in a recent Substack where I was pointing out, some of these numbers, they don't pass a basic sanity check. I mean, sometimes people are like, well, how did you know that number was wrong? And it was because it was ludicrous. It wasn't even in the right ballpark. I mean, that 100,000 hospitalizations for children or whatever, was just so far from reality that I didn't even need to look the number up. I knew that was completely wrong. And a lot of people knew that was completely wrong. I wasn't listening to those hearings, but other people that were immediately were tagging me. They're like, Kelley, get a fact check on this. What's the story? And I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that people tag me because I'm like, a lot of people, just regular moms will hear some number and they know it's not right. But so many other people, who haven't been, immersed in this, they just are like, oh gosh, wow, COVID really is bad. And they don't know that, sometimes these numbers and these articles and things are just completely wrong, not even in the right ballpark.
So what did you do with all the dark money that you got?
Well, I'm doing this podcast, from my private island. No, I didn't, I didn't get any money or anything for any of this. I started my Substack just in December, at the very end of December. I was planning to start it in the new year, but then pushed it up a little bit when the whole Twitter files thing came up. Just because I was like, I need a place to write. I enjoy posting on Twitter, but I was like, I need a place to write some kind of longer form articles. And I had written a few that I posted on my website. I was like, but I want something that's a little bit, easier for distribution. And I was like, and then if I can turn that into something that, compensates me a little bit for some of the time that goes into this, then, maybe I can keep doing it a little bit longer. Otherwise, now that my daughter's in high school, the plan was kind of always that I would go back to work once she was, she's gonna be driving soon. And so it was kind of this at least kind of lets me keep doing this for a little bit while longer.
That's great, because I think your voice is so important, and I follow you on Twitter and subscribe to your Substack and really appreciate how you're able to contextualize things for us. And it's inspiring because so many moms and dads have stepped forward to not only advocate, but also to set the record for kids. And I don't think that we would have come out of this as quickly, even though it's taken so long, without people like you. So thank you so much. We're going to list the address for your Substack for people to go to your Substack and subscribe, and follow you on Twitter and social media and subscribe to everything that you do. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.